Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome two very interesting guests. Mark McKinnon, Vice Chairman of Hill & Knowlton Public Strategies. Mark is known for his media representation in the presidential campaigns of George W. Bush and John McCain. 1-2 lost one. He is also co-founder of No Labels, a nonprofit organization dedicated to bipartisanship and civil discourse in politics, which is something we try to do on this show, David. Bill King is former mayor of Kemah. He's now a lawyer with Bracewell and Giuliani. He's involved with No Labels. He's a leading columnist for the Houston Chronicle. And he's an online columnist for Information Resource, a public policy discussion. And I want to say that, Bill, I'm serious. Your thoughtful columns about various issues are a must-read.
Well, thank you very much.
And, of course, Mark McKinnon is, for those who are Republicans and fans of George W. Bush, I know that's not you, David, Mark did a great job helping the president get elected. But we want to welcome you both.
Yeah, and if he wants to continue to brag on you, we can just leave. So, Mark, I read
shut it down right there.
I saw the label, actually, for No Labels, or the public relations angle, and it was not left, not right, forward.
Yeah.
Which sounds a lot like MSNBC.
They stole it from us.
That's right.
We were out there first.
So tell us how you penetrate the din and the noise of politics and all of what we have, as for the last 50 years, 70 years, seen as liberals versus conservatives, Democrats and Republicans with no label.
Sure. Well, having been involved in politics for 30 years, I've seen over the course of that period of time, and others who've been in longer see it even more acutely, and that is that, sure, we've always had, American politics has never been beanbag. It's been a tough sport, and people feel strongly about what they do, but never before, for a variety of reasons that we could talk about, but it has to do with the evolution of cable television, redistricting, and a number of other factors. There's no question that it is a hyper-partisan environment in Washington, D.C. right now. And the extremes, who are not just arguably, but provably a minority of this country, have disproportionate voice coming out of Washington. You have extremists on the left, hyper-partisans on the right, who feel strongly about their positions, but they have really dominated the dialogue. And the reality is that for most Americans out there watching, and I'm talking millions here, it's really 50, 60+% of the country don't really fall into either of those two camps, and they don't feel like they're being represented. They don't feel like they have a voice or a microphone. So the idea of No Labels was generated to try and give a microphone to those people who are in the vast middle of America who don't feel like they're represented, but also really would want to see a more diplomatic discourse and a more civil dialogue.
And Bill King, I saw the article in the Chronicle that had the composition, at least of those that are interested locally, and excuse me for saying this, but they all look like centrist, Gary would say liberal Democrats. I mean, the picture was of former Congressman Chris Bell, Democratic candidate Gordon Kwan, and several others. Sue Schechter was once Democratic Party chairman. So have you got to any of these Republicans yet?
I think the participation has been more on the Democratic side, I think just because that's the results of the last election. But I think over time this is going to go both directions. And, I've been writing a number of columns about how the middle is not represented, and I get a lot of mail from both sides saying, yeah, I don't feel like I've got a place to be anymore, both Republicans and Democrats.
Well, Mark, the uncivil discourse that's going on in the country has been going on for a while, and would it be fair to say it's not either party's fault, it's both parties' fault?
Oh, no question about that, no question. And we go out of our way to what we call throw yellow flags on both parties that exhibit behavior that really is doesn't help push the ball forward, but generally reflects a lot of people who think the party's more important than the country. But the system, as it's currently designed, is set up in a way that literally the people of opposite parties don't even talk to each other anymore. There used to be bipartisan retreats and all kinds of different functions, but I would say that most people in Congress now, first of all, they come home, they don't stay there anymore, so they go up Tuesday through Thursday, they meet with their caucus, and they never even talk to the other party, and it's a lot easier to demonize the opposition when you don't even know them. So one of the things that we had suggested early on, which was a small step but a symbolic one, I think an important one, was to promote the idea of everybody sitting together at the President's State of the Union address, which they did. And I actually saw that Speaker Boehner, just in the last couple of days, was saying that as a result of the recent budget deal, that he'd spent a lot of time with President Obama. And he thinks that that time interpersonally has created a stronger relationship that I hope will lead to more progress down the line.
But, Bill, here's the problem, you being a Texan and understanding that what happens in Texas sometimes migrates to Washington, as you know, and Mark knows what George Bush was all about, where he came from, and that is that his board, which is made up of a good number of former Clinton advisors, Al Gore, and other think tank people of a Democrat variety, would say, as well as the people who attended your meeting in Houston, that what we have to worry about are those in Texas and in Austin today who would force sonograms on women, who would ban Sharia law like that's a big deal, who articulating that taxes are theft and legalized bribery, creating dependencies and things like that. Forcing people to have guns on campus. Wouldn't your people and Mark's board say that's the group that needs to be stopped in American politics?
Well, I think it's the extremes on both sides, David. I mean, and the problem here, really, in my opinion, is the primary system. I mean, we have a system where you have a very small percentage of the people vote in the primaries, and because all the districts have been drawn to be safe for one part or the other, that's where the candidates are decided. So when you get to the general election, it doesn't really matter who the candidate is. The party for which that district has been gerrymandered is going to win. So you effectively have 5 or 10% of the voters selecting the candidates based on which side of the aisle it's on.
So you like the California plan that they're trying?
I think it's an interesting experiment to see how it works. You know, it's actually been adopted in some other places. Washington adopted it about 4 years ago, and they've had some party-on-party runoffs at the state representative level, and of course that's what you would like to see.
Yeah, Louisiana's done it for a long time. It's referred to it as the jungle primary.
Together.
Yeah.
But Mark, you identified the problem I'm talking about when you called Joe Wilson, the South Carolina congressman who called out the president as a liar. You called him a hyper-partisan idiot and deserving of an opponent. So follow up with my question to Bill: aren't those? Give me an example of the extremists.
David wants it no labels to cover for liberalism. That way we're not be accused of being liberal.
Where are the extremists? If not,
listen, the incoming chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, yesterday was talking about death traps that the Republicans were. Now that's ridiculous. I mean, that's very extreme. That's hyperpartisan. That's not productive to the dialogue. So, listen. For every, there's pretty equal. There's equality on both sides of the extremists.
Mark, Governor Bush, when he was in Texas, worked with the Democrats. He had a Democratic House Speaker. He had a Democratic Lieutenant Governor, and I think set up a prime example of how you can work bipartisan when the election season was over.
Yeah.
And I believe it was his intention going to Washington to do the same thing. What happened?
That's a really interesting question, and one I've thought a lot about, because no question, those of us in Texas who watched Governor Bush and Lieutenant Governor Bullock work together, and Bullock used to say it's amazing how much you can get done when you don't care who gets the credit, which is really true, and they did it was terrific. And much of the message that then Governor Bush campaigned on was about that idea, about changing the tone in Washington, working in a bipartisan way. Ironically, candidate Barack Obama, in his early speeches, was saying very much the same thing, and it'd be a very interesting exercise to go and compare those early speeches on that topic, because I bet you couldn't tell who was who. But they both encountered the same thing when they got to Washington, which is, that they hit the wall. And I think you can argue, part of the problem for President Bush was that the well got poisoned right from the get-go because of the recount, and a lot of Democrats just never saw him as a legitimate president. And, you can say the same thing about the birthers, about President Obama. They don't see him as a legitimate president either. But there is something about Washington and the culture there that makes it very difficult to make the kind of progress that we've seen here in the States.
Well, and I think you cannot overemphasize that every 10 years we redistrict, and that was right after, he came in right after we redistrict, and every time we redistrict, these districts get more Republican or more Democrat, more gerrymandered, and that is really at the heart of why you have this hyper-partisan problem in D.C. and are increasingly having in Austin because of the gerrymandering of the districts.
So you'd like to see a nonpartisan commission do the districts and draw them to be competitive, so actually there are races?
There's a lot of reforms. Florida has adopted nonpartisan redistricting. There's this open primary system we talked about earlier where the top two, everybody runs in the same primary, and the top two vote getters in the primary then go on to the runoff in the general election, even if they're from the same party. So as a result, if you have a district that's been gerrymandered heavily one way or the other, you might have two people from the same party, and in that case, the more moderate of the two candidates is going to have a leg up because the people from the other party are more likely to help them. So it would force things back towards the middle. So I think there's a number of electoral reforms. This is basically a problem of our election system is broken. We don't have a majority of the people selecting our representatives anymore.
And would you say that that's getting in the way of solving the problems, let's say, we have in Texas or we have in the country?
Absolutely, because when you're only talking to the 5 or 10% on either extreme, then you're going to be talking about the issues that are important to those 5 or 10%, and you can't compromise on those, because if you trip the wrong switch with them, you get voted out. Where if you're representing a big middle of the country that cares about a variety of different issues, then you can afford to compromise.
And so the president the other day, when he made his speech, Mark, you identified, as I recall, as his announcement that he's going to be running for re-election. I think you said two things happened that week. Obama comes out for re-election, and Congressman Ryan has a program to save America from the arrogance of government and debt. Is that what you see the choice in the future for us?
Well, let me just make one caveat you mentioned the incident with Joe Wilson, and I just want to clear this up. I did call him out, but I don't think I called him an idiot, because that would be very no labels-like of me calling him an idiot.
But not for David. That's okay.
Made perfect sense to me.
I did contribute to his opponent, though, because I thought that was a great example. But
disrespect. It shows disrespect.
Yeah, it shows disrespect, and that's not productive. I was disappointed by the president's speech yesterday because I thought it was unnecessarily partisan, and I thought that no matter what you may disagree with Chairman Ryan's plan, but to say that it's un-American and not patriotic, I think really exacerbates the problem. So, and you invite this guy to be in the front row for your speech, and then you insult him right in front of him. I don't think that's very presidential, and I don't think it's productive to moving the debate forward. So, boy, it's going to be an ugly year ahead, I'm afraid.
How wrong was the president, though, in saying that, we covet programs that we don't want to pay for? We used to have the rich participating more in paying a fair share. We used to have shared sacrifice, and he gave the examples of the 90s when a lot happened good with a budget that created the opportunities for 22 million jobs. Isn't the opposite of what he is talking about the new patriotism that's worthy of no labels?
Everybody in the country understands that we're going to have to raise more revenue and we're going to have to cut. I mean, everybody gets that, except these idiots in Washington who argue one direction or the other. I mean, the vast middle of America understands we got to do both. We got to sacrifice some, both, and we're going to have to pay some more, especially if you're able to do that. And we're also going to have to cut some programs that are really going to hurt. We got to do both of those to balance this budget. And if we don't, all we're really saying is that we would rather our children pay our debts than we pay our own debts.
Or that they just should have America become a second-rate country in the world.
Is
With a currency that won't be worth very much in the international markets is the problem we have today, David.
Isn't that what Obama was saying? Is we're losing to China, we're losing to South Carolina, South Korea. South Carolina's a problem too. We're losing to Brazil. I mean, and does he have anyone in the Republican Congress that agrees with that? With that,
everybody at the general level says the same thing about this country's in danger. Let's not give this debt to our children. But when it actually comes down to it, one side says we need to do all this with cuts, and the other side says no, we need to tax the rich. Well, you can't tax the rich enough to pay for these programs. You also can't pull the safety net out from underneath America. The American public, the big middle of the country, is not going to agree to either one of those. And so until we get some people that are willing to say we're going to do both of them, the problem's going to go unsolved.
Well, how about politicians that'll be honest with the American people and tell the American people that we got to roll up our sleeves and start working harder, all of us, that we have things to do in this country if we want it to progress. It's a new world. It's not like we're not competing with anybody anymore. We've got all these nations, and you've traveled. China and Korea and Asia, these people, Vietnam, I went to Vietnam, these people are working real hard and they want to make money and they are motivated.
Well,
and you look around here and you kind of worry there's a lot of American people are kind of sloughing on our laurels.
And we also have examples of just the opposite where, governments have gotten out of control in their spending and debt. Look at Portugal and
absolutely
and Greece. But the demagoguery just gets jaw-dropping. But we had the Fiscal Commission that laid out a bunch of options.
Good ideas.
And they are good ideas. And the reality is, a lot of them that are significant are not that draconian. They're really not. When you think about things like the following, when Social Security and most of Medicare was enacted, the average life expectancy was like 62 or something like that. Well, now it's 15 years longer, and yet the benefits age has only been increased 1 year. So we're living 15 years longer, and we're given benefits over 15 years. So it seems to me that we could at least, move that up a couple or 3 years. I'd like to index it to life expectancy back to what it was. That makes sense to me. And plus, those plans that have been suggested, that kind of plan, have been suggested in such a way that it doesn't affect anybody 55 or younger. Now, older, thank you, yeah. So if we can't do that, that seems
if we
so
don't do
common
the
sense to
things
me.
that we have to do to face these problems, what happens is the problems are going to hit us in the head, and then it's going to start being draconian cuts, kind of like Texas had to do. We didn't get control of our budget. They had to cut spending, and they had prison overcrowding, so they just started letting people go, regardless of their crimes. Well, it's the same mentality. If you don't solve the problem, we will have the problem slap us in the face. And so what it takes is leadership. President Bush, another example. He had a plan to deal with Social Security, like it or not like it. He was demagogued on that issue by the Democrats. Instead of saying, we're glad you brought up the topic, Mr. President. This is an area of discussion. We don't agree with all your solutions, but we need to work on this together. But that didn't happen.
I think Republicans pulled the rug on that one as well.
But it doesn't matter. Anybody that steps out with an idea, they're going to be demagogued by the other side. That's just the game that's being played up there right now.
The labels.
Yeah, and until the American public says, look, we're not putting up with it anymore. We want some solutions, and we don't want this game playing. This is going to go on.
What label was President Obama, putting on anyone when he says we did it right in the 90s and we had surpluses and we would have been on a path to not even have a deficit if we'd have kept the tax rates at the Clinton level? What label can you put on that argument, and that with the tax cuts of the 8 years of George Bush?
How about misinformed would be the label?
We created no new net private sector jobs. What label do you put on that argument?
Misinformed.
Well, I just think that, you can go back and look at any particular time in history and carve out a part of it and make a case for what the correct economic policies ought to be based on looking at 4 or 5 or 6 years. Look, the truth of the matter is we're spending a lot more money than we're taking in. That means we're going to have to close that gap one way or the other. There's only 2 ways to close it. Raise more revenue or cut the expenses, and you can't do it all on either side of that ledger.
I do think that while the Republicans have been very successful so far in controlling the narrative on the debate, and it has been about cutting spending and achieved some significant victories along the way, I worry, given where it's headed, that we're going to lose that narrative, because I think that President Obama started a not necessarily true or accurate, but an effective political positioning on this issue. Because I think the general perception among the public now is that the Democrats have given some on the spending side. I would argue not enough, and there's got to be a lot more. But I think that we're going to get very quickly to a point where the perception is going to be that Republicans are entirely intransigent on the revenue side. So I think that's going to be ultimately problematic if we're arguing about the Bush tax cuts and their renewal, and Obama's framing it simply as tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. That's going to be problematic.
Where do you see the give on the Republican side as far as revenue goes?
I think it's
who's the leader?
I'd say tax positive tax reform.
Right.
Not revenue. Revenue positive tax reform.
Tax reform.
Right.
The tax system, as you all know, talk about labels. How about labeling that? It's just a joke.
Yeah.
General Electric makes $13 billion and pays 0 federal tax.
But I'm sure they deserved it. Anyway, but we know the tax code is very complicated. I think the answer is quite simplify the tax codes, eliminate a lot of deductions.
You could lower the rates.
Lower the rates.
Still lower the rates.
And you have more transparency. People think the deductions are a good deal, but after you go through with the computer program, hours and hours to do your own taxes, do you have any idea what the benefits and costs are?
Yeah.
I can tell you I get $1,500 for putting in new windows in my house, but I also spent considerably more, so whatever, right? It's a mess. And so if we deal with that, it could bring in more revenue, especially if you devise a plan that looks at what is the best plan to give adequate revenue to the federal government for the things it needs to do, and also encourage economic prosperity in the country, because that's the other thing. We want people working. We want people making money. We want the American dream to be alive, and I think that's all going to be lost. I think Obama can demagogue all he wants, but the bottom line is, if he uses that and he gets reelected based on that, it's going to hit the fan in his second term.
Yeah.
He's not listening, David. He wants to go back to what President Clinton did, who, by the way, working with Republican Congress, they did accomplish a lot in Clinton's second term economically. They really did a good job. They may not have wanted to, but they ended up doing it right. President Bush didn't have that opportunity. So there is opportunity to do so, but my God,
Or Bush,
politics,
he had no opportunity.
He
He had an entire Congress that was Republican. He just couldn't handle it.
No,
is that the point you're making?
Bug too, David. And your question is?
Let's have some politics in this discussion, shall we?
Yes, sir.
I don't think we've had any so far. Mark, you say that President Obama won 5 red states, Florida, Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, Indiana, and that he can lose all of those and still be reelected. So isn't he presumptively into a second term as we speak?
Well, I think he has all the advantages of an incumbent, and there has been one Democrat president running for re-election that's lost in history. Now, there's been 10 overall, but that's still pretty good odds if you're an incumbent president. But that's conventional wisdom, and the one fun thing about politics is conventional wisdom gets thrown out the window all the time. Look at the election of one Barack Obama. So I'd say that he's got all the advantages going in, but it is a very, very volatile time, and most objective observers would say that we are in an historical frame that's more challenging than perhaps any other time in history, or as challenging anyway. So a lot can happen between now and the election. It's very likely we could have $5, $6 gas, and if that happens, believe me, public opinion can flip very quickly. Now,
Michelle Bachmann could be president.
Well, you got to beat somebody with somebody. So
that probably takes care of Michelle Bachmann. That's why she's running for Congress again.
Michelle Bachmann could win Iowa. I'm telling you, she could win Iowa, and then she could win South Carolina.
Because what Bill talked about, that the margins. What is it? 2%, 3% of the vote may decide who the nominees.
About 5%.
Would decide who the nominees would be.
Mm-hmm. But Mark says that Romney is dead. So, I mean, who is the leader that is going to
That's
say...
not the right question. Who is the Republican candidate who's going to talk to truth to the American people about our problems
be frank about it?
The guy that I really like who does do that is Mitch Daniels. He's the governor of Indiana, and he's been very straight about what we need to do is talk about revenue and about putting social issues aside.
He did that in Indiana, didn't he?
Yeah,
he did. He cut, but he also
Fixed
raised
the pension
revenue.
plans there.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very, very sober, straightforward guy, and I think would be a great candidate. It's unclear whether or not he's going to run, but I hope he does.
Give me your reaction to this. I think the president says we need to have a deal by June, and I believe that, you tell me if I'm wrong, that the Republican majority in the House will make that deal because they do not see anybody who can beat him, and they will preserve their majority by making a deal with this president and throwing their nominee under the bus.
I don't think so. I mean, the problem is going to be, I don't think they're that strategic. I don't give them that much credit. It's a great idea.
They need you back.
But, Grover Norquist, the famous anti-tax advocate, has got, a 230, 40-something Republican members who've signed on to an anti-tax pledge pretty firmly. And so, boy, that's going to be a very difficult thing to get.
And they use it to bomb you in the primary, don't they, Bill?
Well, they're already, the Republicans are already, they're up, there's a big caucus of the Republicans who are upset about the recent budget deal, feeling that the Republicans gave way too much, and they're already talking about primarying the Republicans who voted for this. It would arguably be a Republican win, right? That's what most Republicans thought.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't great. It was what it was. But understanding you have to deal with a Democratic president, and Democratic Senate.
Right.
We got to compromise.
Billion more than we started with.
Right.
But I hear no one on the Democratic side saying, if you do this or if you don't do that, we're going to beat you. We're going to come into your primary and we're going to eliminate you, which is the rhetoric you hear only in one party.
No, I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's
true. Tell me where I'm wrong.
I think that if, I think if you're a pro-life candidate, I think you have a very tough time in the Democratic primary.
Well, they're all gone. I mean, there's no chance of that being brought up.
Which proves my point.
Okay, so let's talk. The concept of getting away with labels, my interpretation of what you all are trying to say is we need to get away from politics when we're not in political season. It shouldn't be 24/7, 365 days a year. We have election cycles. They need to get smaller, and when the elections are over, we need to start working about solving problems. Would that be fair?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, is there any hope that this is going to happen?
Well, I mean, Bill's cited a number of electoral reforms that are going on around the country, and I think that's going to. I think we're going to see a lot of positive results for that, and I think other states are going to follow suit. So I think that's going to help. I think that we're actually getting a very receptive audience from the media in Washington, and we've got 80,000 strong in just a few months for no labels.
And we're listening to you here at PBS, so thanks
exactly.
Thanks, Bill King. Mark McKinnon, sorry to break it up, but it's time for us to close, and we enjoyed it. And we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Read about the guests, follow-up discussions. And until next time, get informed and get active.